Yeah, is anybody reminded of their grandmother right now? Some of you grandmothers, that is you, isn't it? That's you. Hey, this series is about the one thing that keeps you from and causes you to. It's about the one thing that keeps me from and causes me to. It's about that thing that keeps you from celebrating the successes of other people. You know you've been in that situation, thought, why am I not happier for them than I am? There's the one thing inside of you that keeps you from celebrating the successes of others. It's that one thing that keeps you from admitting when you're wrong. You just don't want to admit it. You just can't admit it. Even though you know it, you can't admit it. So you just keep arguing your point. And even though you know you don't have a point, you just keep doing it anyway. It's that one thing that keeps you from admitting that you have failed. Oh, you just can't admit it. That keeps you from admitting that you need help. You just can't get to the point of saying you need help, even though everybody around you is watching you going, they need help. You still don't want to admit you need help. You think you can fool everybody into thinking you don't need help. It's that one thing inside of you and inside of me that keeps us from apologizing when we know we're wrong and we ought to go and we ought to just tell them and own up and, deal with it. Or it's that one thing that keeps us from going and initiating the apology when we were 10% wrong and they were 90% wrong, and so we think, you know what, they own more of this than I do, so I'm not going to go, and we won't go and apologize for that little 10%. We just can't bring ourselves to do it because there's a thing in you and a thing in me that just keeps you from owning that little part that you know was yours to own. It's the thing that keeps us from doing what we know is right, even though we've said that's something we're always going to do, and I'll never and I'll always, and yet now I'm not following through and doing the very thing I always said I would do. It's because of this thing that keeps you from doing the thing that you always know that you ought to do. It's the thing that causes you to. It causes you to resist reaching out and being vulnerable and asking for help. It's the thing that causes you to put up walls and not let anybody know you're struggling. It's the thing that causes you to keep people at arm's length. It's the thing that causes you to resist going to counseling. People say, maybe you should go process that with somebody. And, you're like, nope, not going to do it. We guys were the worst. Nope, not going to do it. Like, this is the thing that causes you to resist all that, to keep people at arm's length. It's a thing that causes you to be happy when other people fail. You have had this moment, so have I, and you think to yourself, that's terrible. I shouldn't feel that way, but you just, inside you just can't help it. You're just happy. You're like, that couldn't have happened to a better person. That was just so perfect that they failed and they ended up having to deal with that because they had it coming. Well, it's this thing inside of you and me that causes us to be happy when somebody else fails. It's the thing that causes us to decide, I will cheat before I lose. I will cheat before I lose because I'm just not going to lose at anything, and I'm sure not going to let anybody know that I've lost at anything. It's the thing that causes you to lie. It causes you to lie to yourself. It causes you to lie to others. It causes you to lie about your first marriage. I just don't want anybody to know what really happened there. It causes you to lie about what's going on with your kids. I don't want anybody to know that my kids aren't perfect and, they don't have it all going together. It's a thing that causes you, in some cases, to lie about what you've accomplished, to lie about your GPA in college, just round it up to the next whole number. That's okay. It's that thing that causes you and it causes me to resist doing what we know is going to be the healthiest thing for us to do. It's the thing that causes you to go into debt. It's the thing that causes you to live on more than you make. It is the thing that causes you to buy things to try to impress people who aren't even paying attention to you. They don't even know you're doing it, but you're still doing it to try to impress them. For the next 3 weeks, I want to talk about this one thing in you because it's in you, and in me because it's in me, that keeps us from and causes us to. Anybody want to take a guess on what we're talking about? Yeah, nobody's going to say it out loud because you're like, if I get it wrong, then I'll be embarrassed. And it's that this is the one thing in you that keeps you from wanting to be embarrassed. I'm with you. We're going to talk for the next few weeks about this simple idea of pride. Aren't you glad you showed up to church? Dads, you're welcome. You came on Father's Day. You could be golfing. You could be at the lake. You came on Father's Day, and now I'm going to talk about pride. That's about as mean as it can get. But hang with me because I think this is going to be helpful. I am not talking about the good kind of pride because there is a good kind of pride. I'm not talking about the kind of pride that you have in your niece and your nephew or your son or your daughter or your family. I'm not talking about that. That's good. You should have that kind of pride. I'm not talking about the kind of pride you have in your workplace. You're just so proud of your team. You're so proud of what you guys accomplish. You're so proud of the culture and the way you serve people or go about doing what you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not talking about that. I'm not even talking about the kind of pride you have in the quality of your work or in how hard you worked in order to accomplish something. Because that's a good thing. You ought to be proud about that. Nothing wrong with that. I am talking about that ugly thing. And you know what it is. I know what it is. We have felt it. We know it's there. We don't want to admit it. We try to ignore it. It's that ugly thing inside of you and that ugly thing inside of me that can wreck relationships. It has in some of our cases. That can wreck family. It's that thing that causes, the rifts between people, and, you hadn't talked to your son or you hadn't talked to your dad in so long. Maybe you hadn't talked in years. It's a thing that can cause you, just to kind of separate, and, everybody gets together and it's just tense, and this is the thing that makes it so tense. Because it can wreck families. It can wreck your future. It can even wreck your faith. It's an ugly kind of pride that rattles around in your heart and it rattles around in mine. C.S. Lewis, who was an extraordinary prolific author, so wise. C.S. Lewis wrote this about pride. He said, unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, he's thinking about all the things that people say are the worst. He says, they're mere flea bites in comparison to pride. He says, pride leads to every other vice. C.S. Lewis argued that whenever you find something wrong, whenever there's an unhealthy behavior, that you can trace it all the way back when you get to the root of it. Pride is what's driving it all. That it's at the root of every other vice. Now, you intuitively know this, and the reason I know you intuitively know this is the same reason why I intuitively know it. Because we have all been the victim of other people's pride, haven't we? Like if we took time and I gave you a microphone, you've got your stories. You probably got stories worse than my stories. You've got stories of this person did this or said this or this happened to me, and the whole reason it happened was because somebody was so proud. You had a terrible experience at work, and the whole reason was because your boss was so arrogant. You had these family dynamics and these rifts because, again, it was pride. You ended up in a divorce, or you ended up with all of this going on, this drama. It was all because of pride. Like I don't have to tell you. You know, you have been the victim of other people's pride. You have been the victim of having to work with, be in proximity to, deal with people who are full of pride, where everything's got to revolve around them. And they put themselves before everybody else. Like, we get that. Here's the point I want to make. Do you realize that there are other people who have been the victim of your pride? You've been the victim, sure. But do you recognize that there are other people around you who have been the victim of your pride? And if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, nope, Matt, that is not me. I'm anything but proud. People are not the victim of my pride. Thank you for confessing your crime. That's exactly what pride says, isn't it? It's not me. I don't have that problem. That's pride right there. So way to go. Now you know what's in there. Other people around us, for all of us, have been the victim at different points of our pride. So what do you do with that? Because the thing about pride, and we'll talk more about this at the end, but the thing about pride is it is so hard to see, isn't it? It's so hard to see. We disguise it in a lot of different ways. So how do you kill something in you that has the potential to kill you if you don't kill it, but you can't see it? What do you do? Because I'm telling you, when you give pride the remote control of your life, which is in essence what happens whenever pride rattles around in our hearts, it has total control. We don't even realize it's holding the remote, but it is. When you give pride the remote of your life, it creates some serious problems. I'll just give you a few examples to get you thinking. Pride lies to you. This is one of the big problems with pride. Pride lies to you. It lies to you in a couple different ways. One, it lies to you because it tells you that it is the way for you to be bigger and better and more significant and more special than anybody else. Pride says if you want the best version of you, if you want to experience the best life, then you got to jump on my path. Pride says, listen, there are a lot of good things you can do for other people, and you should, but you got to look out for number one first. You got to make it about you first. And if you want to experience the very best life you can experience, then you take care of you first, and then you can worry with your extra time or your extra money with taking care of everybody else. And it's a lie, because that is not the way it works. But you don't realize that's not the way it works until you get to the end of life and then discover it never delivered what it promised. But here's the other way pride lies to you. The other problem it creates here is pride tells you you don't have problems that you actually have. Pride tells you, no, you don't have a problem with greed. You don't have a problem with anger. Your temper's not an issue. Anybody would get angry like that over that kind of stuff. You don't have an anger problem. Pride tells you you don't have a jealousy problem. Pride tells you your insecurity, that's not an issue. You ought to feel that, and that's okay. As a matter of fact, they're the problem. They're the ones making you feel that way. Pride tells you you don't have an addiction issue. Pride tells you you're not drinking too much. Pride tells you that habit you got in your life, it's not literally killing your physical health. You ought to just go ahead and keep doing it. Pride tells you that porn is not actually a big issue. It's not going to hurt you in the long run. That pride tells you you don't have a marriage problem. You're not struggling as bad as you think you are. As a matter of fact, it's a them issue, not a you issue. Here's the thing that pride does. Pride robs you and it robs me of our self-awareness. Now stop and think about this for a minute. There are very few things that you have more valuable to you than your self-awareness. Have you ever, I know you have, spent time around people who had little to no self-awareness? If it wasn't so painful, it would be comical, wouldn't it? When you're around somebody who has little to no self-awareness, you watch them and you think to yourself, why in the world would they let that come out of their mouths? Didn't they know when they said that it would sound like this and people would respond that way? Or how could they think that was a good choice and nobody would be impacted? We've all been around people who weren't self-aware. They were like a bull in a china shop. They didn't know. They had no clue. They just thought, oh, it's everybody else's problem, not mine. We've been around it. We know how ridiculous it is. Listen, it's pride that has robbed them of that self-awareness. And I'm telling you, whether you realize it or not, whenever there's pride rattling around in your heart, it's robbing you of some of your self-awareness, which means you can't grow and become a better person because you're not even aware and willing to acknowledge where you need to grow. That's why not only does pride lie to you, but pride also diminishes you. It makes you smaller. Pride promises it's going to make you bigger. It actually makes you smaller. Pride diminishes your capacity to admit and acknowledge what you need to admit and acknowledge. Have you ever ended up creating more pain for yourself than was necessary simply because you wouldn't admit and acknowledge something? Of course you have. So have I. Just because you wouldn't own something and apologize, of course you've had that experience. So have I. Pride diminishes your capacity to admit and acknowledge. Pride diminishes your capacity to say what needs to be said. Pride is the thing that keeps you from looking at him, from looking at her, and giving them the compliment. You've had this moment, haven't you, where you thought, I should go tell him what a great job he did leading that project. I should go tell her that was an incredible presentation, way to go. But I'm not going to tell them because I wish I was where they were. I wish I was doing what they were doing, or I just don't like them because, they've got something I want. Pride is that thing that diminishes your capacity to say what needs to be said. For some of you, it's a thing that diminishes your capacity to look at your son or your daughter and tell them, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. Or maybe for some of you, even to say, I love you, unconditionally. Pride's the thing that keeps you from saying that. Because they're not living out the dreams you had for them, and so you don't want to tell them, and they're excelling in something, but they're excelling in something that embarrasses you a little bit. Because good grief, your dream was for them to be doing this, and they shouldn't be doing that, and they're doing that, and most other kids like them don't do that. So you're just not willing to tell them you're proud of them because you don't want them doing it because you're embarrassed by it. It's pride that keeps you from saying what needs to be said. It's pride that diminishes your capacity to hear what needs to be heard. We all know what this is like because we have all had moments in life where we have had people show up in our lives and tell us something we didn't want to hear. And we shut them down. We argued with them. In some cases, we attacked them for doing the most loving thing and trying to tell us a hard truth. Why would you do that? Why would you choose not to listen to people who love you deeply? Well, there's only one explanation. It's pride. Pride has diminished your capacity to hear what needs to be heard from the people you need to hear it from. Pride diminishes your capacity to give what needs to be given when it needs to be given. This is what pride does to us. And that all leads to this other problem. Pride isolates you. This is where people who are proud always end up. they end up isolated. Because if you're full of you, there's no room for anybody else. When I'm full of me, there's no room for anybody else. So pride ends up isolating you from others. Now, you know this because you've been on the other side of it. You have worked with somebody who is so full of pride that you thought to yourself, nobody wants to work with them. I do not want to work with them. I'm only going to work with them when I absolutely have to, and I'm going to get out of this as quick as I can get out of this. And when you saw them making a decision that wasn't going to work out, you didn't speak up and say anything. You just thought, let them have a train wreck because they're not going to listen to me anyway. You've seen this happen in family dynamics, haven't you? You've seen this happen in marriages. You've seen this happen between parents and kids or grandparents and grandkids. Where there was somebody in your family, and it's not that you didn't love them, you loved them. It wasn't that you didn't appreciate some of the things they did, you appreciated it. The problem was they were so full of pride, everything had to revolve around them, and everybody in the family had to tiptoe around them. So everybody had to do whatever so-and-so wanted done. And they would give you things, but you knew when they gave you things, it was given because they loved you, but there was also you just felt like there were some invisible strings attached. And part of the reason they gave you felt like is so they could have leverage. So when they told you, nope, I want you doing this instead, you just had to do it. And everybody went along, and it wasn't like it blew the family up necessarily, but eventually you just get to the point where you get so tired of everything having to revolve around that person. Of their voice being so strong and of their presence being so strong that, they won't listen to anybody. Everybody just needs to listen to them. And there was a sense in which the relationship you had with them began to distance itself. Because pride isolates you from others. As a matter of fact, if you allow pride to do this, if you become the kind of person who refuses to listen to the input of others, you will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. They'll just quit telling you things. They'll see the train coming right at you, and they won't even speak up because they know it's a waste of their time to speak up. Matter of fact, that part of the reason they won't speak up is because they're tired of being attacked by you when they tell you the truth. We've all been on the other side of that. But for some of us, maybe we're the ones creating that now. And we are isolating ourselves from other people in the process. Now, it goes a bit further, this isolation. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but pride also isolates you from God. The longer you allow pride to rattle around in your heart, the more distance is created between you and your heavenly Father. Not on his end, but on yours. King David, who was the second king in the history of the nation of Israel, he wrote an interesting description or observation of this. Here's what he said. He said, talking about a proud person, in his pride, the wicked man does not seek him, referring to God. Well, of course he doesn't, because who do proud people seek? Well, proud people seek themselves. When I give pride the remote control of my life, I'm always seeking me. I'm always paying attention to me. I'm looking out for what's best for me. I don't think about anybody else first. So David says, I've just observed that in his pride, the wicked man doesn't seek God. In all his thoughts, I love the way he put this, there is no room for God. Well, why is that? Because only one person can hold the remote control of your life. It's as if in your life, in your heart, and in my heart, there is a control room. But it's a control room that only seats one. And what many of us have done is said, I think it's best for me if I sit down in this control room. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a relationship with God. It just means there's no room for God in your control room. You may have a relationship with him, but that's very different than following him. As a matter of fact, a lot of us who call ourselves Christians, what we do is we sit ourselves down in the control room, but we say, God, I'd like for you to stay right outside there because at some point I may not actually be able to control everything I'm supposed to control here in this control room. And so when that happens and something spins out of control, I'm going to holler at you and I need you to come fix it, and then you can go back and sit down until I need you again. In practical terms, this is often how we live. It's called being a practical atheist. A practical atheist is somebody who believes in God, but then lives as if he doesn't exist. Now, if you just pause and kind of step back and think about that, how arrogant is that in terms of the approach? I mean, good grief. He is the first cause of everything, the creator and sustainer of all. He gave his life for us, and yet we're looking at him saying, you know what, you're more like a genie in a bottle. If you could just sit over there and, I'll holler at you when I need you, get my 3 wishes, and then you can go right back. Matter of fact, for some of you, this isn't true for all of you, but for some of you, This is exactly why you don't follow Jesus. Now, when we sit and have conversations, or if we had a conversation, you would say this to me. You would say, the whole reason I choose not to follow Jesus is I'm actually way too smart to do that. You wouldn't say it in those terms, but that's really the message. I'm just way too smart. My intellect is too great for me to follow Jesus the way some of you people follow Jesus. It doesn't make any sense. I'm a person of science, and I've studied all that, and I've done this, and I've done this. And so, you're the kind of person that whenever somebody asks you about coming to church or Christianity and your views on it, you've got some arguments, and they sound really good. Like you come with so much passion, you just got all these arguments. The problem is this. It's always a one-way conversation. Like you're willing to spew all of your ideas and opinions, but you're never curious enough to ask any questions. You just assume you already know it all and you've got it figured out. And I would suggest to you that maybe you should consider the real reason that you're not following Jesus is not because you're so smart, it's because you're so proud. You've been proud enough that you haven't been willing to sit down and consider the fact that maybe you don't know everything and maybe the conclusions you come to aren't entirely true. Maybe you should at least explore the other side. See, pride keeps us from doing a lot of that. There's just no room from God. Pride isolates us, not just from other people. It eventually isolates us from God. So, you got something in you, and I've got something in me that's really hard to see. How do you kill it before it kills you and it kills me? What do we do with that? I want to suggest something, and maybe you've never thought of it this way. But this, to me, is one of the reasons following Jesus is so powerful. You see, pride is a prison. You never thought of it that way. But your pride is a prison. It locks you in, and it locks God and others out. When I say it locks you in, here's what I mean. Pride locks you in and keeps you from the things you actually want most in life. If you talked about the things that you wanted to most experience in life, you wouldn't talk about achievements, and you wouldn't talk about fun, and you wouldn't talk about some of that stuff that's important. There's nothing wrong with that. But pride doesn't keep you from that stuff. You can be proud and have a lot of fun in life. You can be proud and achieve a whole lot in life. We've got a lot of examples of that. But there's something way beyond that you actually want most, and so do I. You want fulfillment. You want meaning. You want purpose. You want rich relationships. Pride is a prison because it locks you in and keeps you from those things. Pride keeps you from getting where you most want to be and experiencing what you most want to experience. I'll give you one simple example. There's a big difference between fun and fulfilling. Nothing wrong with either one of them. You can experience a lot of fun and be full of pride. The problem with that is fun is a pastime. Fun is a one-time event. Fun is something that you always see in the rearview mirror. You have this moment where you had fun and you always look back in the past and go, oh man, you remember that? That was so much fun. The problem is fun never travels with you. It doesn't, does it? Fun doesn't travel with you. You have to create new fun and then more fun and then more fun because fun won't travel. You know what travels with you? Fulfilling. Fun doesn't travel with you. Fulfilling travels with you. Fun's in the rearview mirror. Fulfilling is sitting in the passenger seat. When you experience a fulfilling life, it's way more valuable than fun. One is an event. One is a constant. Pride allows you to experience a lot of fun, but it's a prison because it locks you in and keeps you from fulfilling. You've never met a proud person that you looked at and said, they were so arrogant throughout their lives, look at what a fulfilling life they lived. That's never happened because they're mutually exclusive. So you have to figure out, and I have to figure out, there's this thing inside of you and me that we can't see, but it's locked us into a prison. When it's rattling around in our hearts and we don't deal with it, what do you do and how do you keep it from killing you? How do I keep it from killing me? Now what's interesting is when you look at the life of Jesus, here's what you discover. The invitation to follow Jesus is actually an invitation to unfollow pride. Now, I'm not talking about having a relationship with God or being a Christian. This is very different. Following Jesus is about way more than that. Following Jesus, what I mean by that is the invitation to look at Jesus and the life that he lived and the values that he held and the example that he set for us, and you say, I'm going wherever he goes. I'm following that model. I'm going to value the same things. I'm going to practice the same behaviors. I'm going to live that way. I'm not going to get it perfect. I'm not going to get it right. But I want to be going his direction. The invitation to progressively believe and behave more like Jesus, to follow him. It is an invitation to unfollow pride. Because when Jesus showed up, he introduced a radical, liberating version of humility. Now, the Apostle Paul wrote about this once in the first century. He was writing to these Christians in the city of Philippi. And he begins to talk to them about this very idea that the invitation to follow Jesus, it's an invitation to unfollow pride. And I just find this fascinating for this simple reason. If there's anybody in history who knew what it was like to be consumed by pride, it was the Apostle Paul. Just think about this. How arrogant do you have to be to believe that your way is right, and you are so certain your way is right that you're going to go around on a crusade killing anybody who doesn't agree with your way that you believe is right? That was the Apostle Paul. Before he met Jesus, he was that arrogant. My way is right, I'm killing all of you who don't believe like me. And then he meets Jesus and he discovers for himself, oh my goodness, this invitation to follow Jesus is an invitation to unfollow pride. And so he's writing to these Christians in Philippi a few years later, and he's explaining to them how this has impacted him and how it should impact them. If you grew up in church, this may be familiar, but I hope you'll look at it with fresh eyes because it's really, really powerful and it's really, really helpful. Here's what Paul wrote to them and to us. He said, in your relationships with one another, because relationships are where pride shows up, right? Always. So in your relationships with one another, he says, have the same mindset or the same attitude, the same posture, if you will, as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Now, I don't want you to miss this. Paul said, first of all, Jesus was in very nature God. This was Paul's way of saying, we don't think Jesus was just sent from God, that he was a messenger of God. No, no, no. When you saw Jesus, you were looking into the eyes of God. God just decided, I'm going to show up on the earth, put on flesh, and try to connect with these people and help them to understand who I am and how they can have a relationship with me. So Paul said, we're convinced. There Jesus is, God in human flesh. And yet, even though God is here on this planet in human flesh, he did the exact opposite of what we would have expected a God to do. He did not show up with so much power and so much glory that everyone was just overwhelmed and consumed by it and had to bow and serve him. He decided, in spite of the fact that he was God, not to use the perks and the power of being God for his own advantage. Well, if he didn't use it for his own advantage, then whose advantage did he use it for? Paul says, I'll tell you. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Now, this is interesting because it is common for subjects to serve their king. I'll tell you what's uncommon, for a king to come and serve his subjects. But Paul said that's what he did. And we think it's uncommon today, but our culture's progressed a lot. We can't even fathom how uncommon this was in the first century. They were living in a century, in a culture where might made right, where the person who had the most power and the person who had the most money got to make the rules. That's the way it worked in the Roman Empire. And Jesus shows up and he says, I know how it works for you guys, and so therefore, all I have to do is play my God card, and I have more power and I have more money and I have more everything than any of you, so I get to make all the rules, but I'm not doing it that way. I'm redefining what greatness looks like. Greatness doesn't look like how many people are serving you. Okay, well, you're greater than them. How much money and power do you have? Okay, well, you're not as great as them. He says, no, greatness is determined by how many people and how well you serve. And so Jesus said, I'm showing up to set the example for what true greatness actually looks like. Because Jesus taught that serving was the pathway to significance. That the way to get fulfillment and meaning and purpose in life was not through pride. The path of pride doesn't get you there. It was actually through serving. So he said, I'm going to set an example. I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like to do this. And when you read the story of Jesus through this lens, it's almost like every single day he was waking up going, oh, no, pride, I'm going to show you. Pride, you're not even going to get a little nudge in my heart. I'm not letting you, get a crack there. So he would wake up one day and say, pride, let me show you. I'm going to go serve that person that I shouldn't serve. Take that, pride. He'd wake up the next day, I'm going to go heal that person nobody else will even touch. Take that, pride. The next day, I'm going to go talk to those people nobody wants to talk to, much less God shouldn't be talking to them, but I'm going to talk to them. Take that, pride. And then on the night of his arrest, the one night when he should have, if any time, made it all about himself, he looks at the 12 guys who are his best friends. One of them is going to betray him. The rest of them are going to abandon him. And he says, take this, pride. I'm going to grab a basin of water and a towel, and I'm going to wash all their feet just before I'm arrested and crucified. It was like every single day he was getting up going, let me show you how you kill it, how you kill the pride that rattles around in your heart. And then Paul writes this, and if you grew up in church, you've heard this, and it's lost its impact. I'm telling you, this, if we had been able to be there and see it, it would still take our breath away every time we thought about it. Paul says, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself in the ultimate way by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. It is very common for subjects to die for their king. It is completely uncommon for a king to die for his subjects. But Jesus says, I want to show you exactly what humility looks like. Exactly what it looks like to think about other people before you think about yourself. Now, here's one of the things about this that I find convicting and fascinating all at the same time. Think about this. Jesus, he was right. He was wronged. He still initiated reconciliation. He was right. Jesus was 100% right. He was wronged, ultimately by being crucified on a cross. And he still, in spite of the fact he was right and in spite of the fact he was wronged when he was on this earth, chose to do everything in his power to make reconciliation possible. He chose to build a bridge as far as he could build it, to open the door as wide as he could open it, and to let everybody know, you can have a relationship with me, in spite of the fact that I'm right, in spite of the fact that you wronged me. Now, let me just ask you a question that'll make you feel as bad as me as I studied this, okay? Misery loves company. What do you do? What do you do? How do you react when you are right about something and you are wronged by someone? Come on, you had these moments, haven't you? Some of you are like, this is my life. I'm always right and I'm always wronged. Well, here we go. What do you do when you're right and you're wronged? I got to guess I know what you do. At least it's a thing that I tend to do. You get angry, don't you? How dare they? You want to pay them back. At the least, you like, I'm not going to initiate reconciliation. They're coming to me. They're owning this. Because I'm right. And I was wrong. This is all on them. That was not the response of Jesus. He was right. He was wronged. And he initiated reconciliation. So, the Apostle Paul's writing this and reminding these Christians in Philippi of this. And he says, okay, so now what do you do with the pride in you? What do I do with the pride in me that rattles around inside? What do you do when you find yourself, because this is where some of us are if we were honest, what do you do when you find yourself locked in a prison of pride? He says, well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Pride is a prison. Humility is the key. You want out of that prison? It's easy. Choose humility. Go do the humble thing. This is what's amazing about this. Pride is a prison that you lock yourself in. And the lock is on your side. You can let yourself out anytime you want. Now you know this. Think about it. How do you get out of a situation that pride has gotten you into? Well, it's humility. Humility gets you out of any problem pride has gotten you into. Some of you, you're in the middle of a problem right now. It's relational tension. It's relational drama. It's a workplace deal. I don't know what it looks like for you. You're in the middle of something, and if you were honest, you would say, the reason I'm in the middle of this problem is because of pride. I jumped into this deal. I shouldn't have jumped into it. It was pride that drove it. I signed the contract, I shouldn't have signed it, it was pride. I borrowed the money, I shouldn't have borrowed it, it was pride. I did this, I said this, I refused to go talk to them, I refused to sit down with them, I refused, it was pride. And you're standing there holding the key the entire time. You know, because it's already crossed your mind, well, if I would just do this, it would probably help resolve the issue. But you haven't done it yet because you're too proud to do it. I've been there too. But this is always true. Pride is a prison, humility is a key. Humility will always get you out of whatever pride got you into. So the question is, are you willing to follow the example of your Savior and choose to do the humble thing? To follow Jesus is an invitation to unfollow pride. It will just happen naturally because they are mutually exclusive. The invitation to follow Jesus takes you on a path of humility that begins to root the pride out of your heart and mind. So what do you do with this? Here's what I want to do. I want to give you 3 questions. I think these are 3 questions you ought to spend some time right now and for the next few minutes processing. I hope you'll spend some time this week processing them. You may need to jot them down. You may need to get on your phone and, put them in somehow. But again, I get it. You don't want anybody to know that you're actually taking this seriously because that's pride. So you're trying to, don't let anybody know I have a pride issue. You figure out how to capture these questions. And you don't have to tell anybody you're thinking about them, but you should at least process this. Here's the first one. How does pride show itself in your life? How does it show itself in your life? Because it shows itself somehow. So what's it look like? If you don't know the answer to this, I'm going to give you 2 quick ways to know, okay? The first one is this. Later on today, when you're with a group of friends or you're with your family, maybe you're all sitting down to eat, here's what I want you to do. I'd wait till the end of the meal so you don't ruin the whole meal. When you get to the end of the meal, look at them and say, hey, I was listening to Matt today, and he was talking about pride and how we all have some pride. I just couldn't see any pride in my heart. Could you guys tell me? I don't know how pride shows itself. Can y'all tell me? You just ask that and see what happens. If you have a lot of family and friends who are conflict averse, here's what's going to happen. Their eyes are all going to get really big. They're going to all look at each other in a state of panic, and then they're going to put their heads down and keep eating, and nobody's going to say a word. It's going to be really awkward. And then somebody eventually is going to go, oh, we don't think you have. No, we don't. And they won't even be able to say the whole sentence because they know they're lying. But they'll just be like, we don't, and they'll change the subject and go on. That awkwardness is a clue for you, okay? You got a bunch of pride. They're too scared to tell you because you jumped them the last time they did. Or if you're around friends or family who don't mind saying it like it is, when you ask this question, they're going to start laughing out loud. They are. These are my friends. They just laugh out loud. And then they're like, oh, poor Matt. And they pull out a list on their phones. It's like they've been keeping it. I don't understand, They'll pull out a list and just start reading through. Well, here's some things in the last 2 weeks, So if you're brave enough, just ask. Now, I know you're not brave enough. You don't have enough guts. You're not going to do that. So I'll tell you another way if you're not willing to do that. Just start paying attention to where you're entitled. Where do you feel entitled? Where do you feel like you deserve something? Where do you get angry or frustrated because somebody's not doing what you think they ought to do? They're not serving you as well as they ought to serve you. You're not getting the kind of service at that store you ought to. You go to the restaurant and the service isn't as good and they don't get your order right. And that happens. And it's okay to say something, but this is beyond that. This is you get frustrated and angry and you kind of let them have it. There's entitlement. Well, I deserve good service. Okay, maybe not. I don't know if you do or not. It doesn't matter. You're entitled. That's pride. You think they owe you something. You got to pay attention to where you feel entitled. Well, they should. They deserve. I deserve. They ought to have to. Second question. How does pride disguise itself in you? Because it always will. For some of you, it disguises itself this way. Somebody says, maybe you're dealing with pride. No, I'm just confident. I'm just confident. That's what you always call it. I'm just confident. Now, there's a big difference in confidence and arrogance. You ought to be confident. There's nothing wrong with being confident. Confident people, though, don't go around telling everybody how great they are and how confident they are. They don't have to. Everybody can see how good they are at that thing. They don't have to tell anybody. You know what confident people do? Confident people actually spend more time serving other people because they don't need somebody telling them how great they are, and they're not so insecure that they're afraid if I serve them, they're going to think I'm a servant and less than, and then I'm not going to feel good about myself. Confident people don't mind being treated like a servant. Insecure people can't stand it. And pride's at the root of insecurity. For some of you, you disguise it by saying, I just love nice things. That's why I spend the money I do on my house. That's why I got to upgrade my boat. That's why I've got to have that nicer car and I spent the money on it. That's why I buy the clothes and, the whatever your deal is. I just love nice things. No, you don't. If you were honest with yourself, you would admit that's just pride. You're trying to impress somebody, or you're trying to stay ahead of somebody, or you're trying to present an image to other people that you're somebody you don't feel like you are. It's all pride. Well, I just work hard. That's why I'm just hard work. No, you're trying to outcompete somebody. There's nothing wrong with hard work. You ought to work hard. Or is that why you're doing it? Or really, are you not spending enough time with family because you're trying to prove something to somebody? And then final question. How much longer do you plan to let pride hold the remote of your life? This is such a snarky question. I'm going to admit it, okay? Because it's like, of course, you shouldn't. But you just figure it out. Are you going to let pride control your life for another month? Just pull out your calendar and say, I'm going to do another month of pride, and then I'll put it on my calendar. I'll stop. A year, a season of life. I mean, it's wrecking things around you. You don't even see it yet, but it is. How much longer? Or are you willing to say, pride don't mess with me. I'm going to start choosing humility. Pride don't mess with me. I'm going to go apologize. Pride don't mess with me. I'm going to go give them a compliment. Pride don't mess with me. I'm going to open up to my small group and be vulnerable about what's going on in my life. Pride don't mess with me. I'm going to admit that my relationship is struggling and I'm going to get help. Pride don't mess with me. I'm going to start praying. Pride, you mess with me too much. I will pray out loud, pride. You better look out. Out loud in front of people. It's unreal. You got to decide. Here's what I know. The invitation to follow Jesus is an invitation to unfollow pride. You have two choices, and so do I. You can follow something that's going to kill you eventually, or you can follow someone who died for you. The choice is yours. Pride is a prison. Humility is the key. Humility is what sets you free. So start killing it before it kills you and before it kills me. Let me pray for us. God, this is so hard to see in ourselves, and it's really hard to admit. It's really hard to admit to others. Would you help us this week, when it rears its ugly head, just to notice and to be honest enough with ourselves to say, that's it. That's what he was talking about Sunday. That's pride right there. And God, would you give us enough strength in that moment to choose humility, because it really does set us free. Thanks for the example, Jesus, you set for us. And thanks for the invitation to follow you, because it is an invitation to unfollow this thing that will kill us if we leave it in our hearts. And it is in your name we pray. Amen.